G'day everyone and welcome to another episode of the Aussie Investing Machine. Thank you so much for joining me in this episode. Today we're going to have a look at a full depth analysis of a company on the ASX called Hazer Group. Now Hazer Group is involved in the production of hydrogen. They're based in Western Australia and they've got an innovative process to produce hydrogen called the Hazer process. So we'll do a deep dive into this company, take a look at their AGM presentation and go through and see whether or not it's a worthy investment. Before we get started, don't forget to smash that like button and of course please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. As always, these videos are for educational purposes only and should not be considered investment advice. Before making any investment decisions, make sure to consult a licensed financial advisor. In my opinion, the first few companies that can get a foothold in the hydrogen market will have a very profitable future. There's no doubt that the hydrogen industry is going to be massive globally and especially in Australia. Hydrogen is going to be a very practical way to achieve zero emissions where batteries just don't cut it. We know for applications like air travel, trains and long haul road haulage, hydrogen is certainly superior to battery technology. So currently Hazer Group is focusing on commercialization of their Hazer process, which is a low emissions hydrogen production system, which also happens to produce graphite. Now I thought I'd also play this short video which Hazer has got on their website, which sort of explains how their process works for producing hydrogen, and it shows the inputs and the outputs. We talked about iron ore, we talked about graphite. They've got a great little animation, so I'll play this through some parts so you can have a look, and I guess this will really explain what they're doing a lot better than I can. So yeah, enjoy and I'll be back in a moment.
The Hazer process enables the effective conversion of natural gas into hydrogen and high-quality graphite using iron ore as a process catalyst. The Hazer pilot plant uses natural gas as its primary feedstock. The gas is stored as LNG, which is regasified and fed through the main gas manifold before being taken to the reactor to commence the Hazer process. The Hazer plant is based on a reactor called the fluidized bed reactor, where solids and gases can freely mix to enable the efficient conversion of natural gas into hydrogen and graphite. In this process, the methane molecules and the natural gas interact with the surface of the catalyst, decomposing into hydrogen and graphite. Under these conditions, the catalyst disintegrates into nanofragments, a process known as dusting. The reactor expels a combination of gases, unreacted natural gas, and the hydrogen product, as well as the solid graphite particles. This stream is filtered with sintered metal plates, yielding high purity graphite with minor amounts of encapsulated catalyst.
The catalyst material in this process is iron ore, which we all know is a plentiful resource in Western Australia where the company's based. So first up here we've got the AGM presentation and CEO letter. This heads up the AGM investor slideshow, which we'll go through in detail shortly. Essentially, this letter outlines what the company's doing at the moment, what they've been doing through 2020, and where they're going heading into the future. So the first thing here to look at is a term they call the CPD, which is their commercial demonstration plant. So this is their first fully integrated deployment of the Hazer process, and they're planning to deliver 100 tonnes per annum of low emission hydrogen. And they're calling it a fundamental stepping stone on the road to commercializing the Hazer process. We've seen some pretty strong cash flow from Hazer, and a lot of this is to do with government funding. So they mentioned that here, as has been announced before last year's AGM, we've been offered a conditional grant of over $9 million from ARENA, which is the Australian Renewable Energy Agency. This government funding is key to funding their operations until they get that commercialization happening, which they're expecting to do through that CPD. They've also had some institutional investment, which they mentioned here. We can see Mitchell Asset Management has contributed $6 million, which is an excellent contribution, and it will really help them quickly progress to commercialization. So that AGM letter was published in November, and since then we've had a more recent update. We'll get back to that AGM slideshow in just a second when we get into the details, but I also wanted to touch on their Appendix 4C, which came out on the 31st of December. In this letter, they've changed the wording a little bit. They're now calling this project that they're constructing in Perth the CDP, which is the Hazer Commercial Development Project. So we can see this project is the same one they were talking about before, due to this 100 tonnes per annum sort of benchmark that they're referencing. It will be a low emission hydrogen production facility that will be the first large scale fully integrated development of their Hazer process. They give us some details about where that will be located, and they also talk about their progress on development approvals. They're expecting to start work on site in Q1 of 2021, which begins the first part of the construction process, and they are planning to have this plant finished in October 2021. Now that date's been pushed back about 12 weeks. It was 12 weeks earlier. Now that date is forecast for October. So I think that's going to be a real key turning point for the company. If they can deliver and complete that plant in October, things are going to get really exciting, I think. Now that October guidance was given in that AGM presentation we'll get to in a moment, and they reference that here. So at the date of this report, there is no change to the project schedule and CapEx budget guidance previously given in the annual general meeting presentation. So we'll get back to that in a moment, but that's why I wanted to look at that document in detail, because there's a lot of key information about this development and also the company in general. Now, the other interesting point that I wanted to raise in their 4C is this statement here. So throughout 2020, Hazer has developed a strong relationship with Chiyoda Corporation, which is a Japanese company, to collaborate on the commercialization of the Hazer technology. Now, this is significant because we know Japan will be a big customer for hydrogen. They're also involved in another project by the Victorian government in Gippsland. We've spoken about that in other episodes. So it certainly seems that Japanese investment will be key to getting these projects off the ground, and involving them early is a great way to, I guess, set up customers for the future. And in this section here, they talk a little bit about their research and development activities. So I guess the key thing here is they talk about their graphite characterization, and we'll get to that in a moment. But as we said, the graphite is a byproduct of their Hazer hydrogen producing process, and they're sort of talking about here in their R&D section of the business, what are they going to do with the graphite. They're looking at ways of processing it further so that it becomes really high grade graphite, and that way they will be able to sell that in addition to their hydrogen production, which could be a real strategic edge for this business and make it, I guess, more profitable than other producers of hydrogen who maybe don't have a byproduct that is valuable like graphite can be. So just here on their AGM presentation, what I'll do, I'll go through and pick out what I think are the key slides, and we'll discuss those in some depth. So here on their first slide, they sort of talk about 2020 and give us a bit of a wrap on how the year's gone. And overall, it's a positive spin. They talk about some difficulties throughout 2020 with the pandemic, but they also talk about the Chiyoda partnership we mentioned before, increasing interest in the Hazer technology, and the way that they may be able to engage some more long-term partners, and then their enhanced R&D, which we talked about looking into how they're going to use that graphite byproduct. So here's the first slide on their Hazer commercial demonstration project, which we talked about. They've changed the naming of that slightly since then. However, it does give us some clear goals and progress in these dot points. So we can see how their permit process has been going. So they've got development permits, they're going through some dangerous goods licensing, and they're waiting approval for Aboriginal heritage approval for where they're planning to construct the plant. They are targeting commencement of site works in Feb 2021. So that's that date. We know it was Q1 from that 4C letter, and here it's sort of clarified clearing and civil prep by Feb 2021. So they've given us a clear commencement date, and I think that's great. It's very transparent. We should obviously expect an announcement in February from Hazer to sort of tell us, hey, we've started construction, and I think that announcement may bring some positive news for their share price as well. Of course, that is speculative, but I think it will be a key step. So be ready for that announcement in February. So here's a little bit more on their revised timelines for this project completion, which I think, again, is fantastic. They're not only telling us when it's going to start, but they're giving us some solid dates about when they think it will be complete. So they're targeting commissioning of the plant in October 2021, which is a pretty good turnaround, starting in Feb, finishing in October. As we mentioned, that's 12 weeks later than the original commencement of commissioning. The project remains within budget, so it's fully funded, and they have about 5% contingency, which is a little bit lean. However, with these government grants that continue to come in, I think they'll be okay. But at the moment, construction hasn't started, and we all know that if there are going to be any costs, they will come during construction. So hopefully that 5% contingency holds up. If it does, then this will be a successful project. So we'll move on to the next slide. So here we talk about the global hydrogen market, and there's some quotes here about the Bank of America talking about the total market cap, 2.5 trillion, which is massive. We've spoken about the rare earths market only being a couple of 100 million before, this really blows it out of the water. So big market opportunity here. And they go through and tell us about the different countries and what their emissions targets are. So we can see the USA, we've had a bit of a swing in their fortunes with the Biden presidency coming in. They will rejoin the Paris Agreement, which locks them in to some climate targets. Australia has a low emission technology roadmap. It's probably, on a global scale, one of the less restrictive emissions targets. Japan, net zero by 2050. China by 2060. Germany and France, the Euro 7 and 9B. Hydrogen strategies, I don't know too much about those, but I think we know Europe is trying to transition quite quickly to net zero. So hydrogen will obviously play a big part in that. And the UK phase out of new petrol vehicles by 2030, and that's a massive one. So especially for long haul, it's going to be important to have some other options that aren't electric cars. So a few more points here. So many of the targets are still medium to long term. Acceleration of trial programs and pilots and demonstrations. Emphasis on building supply chains and capability to seize new employment and investment opportunities. So I think Hazer recognizes that the world is shifting towards this, and soon there will be a need for hydrogen fuel, and they need to be ready to fulfill that need and start shipping some product as soon as possible. So in their business development section of the presentation, probably the item here that I'm interested in is their key focuses in 2021. And they're targeting a range of capacities to suit various end-use scenarios, indicatively 1,000, 2,000 to 5,000 TPA H2 capacity. So this is going to be key for how much they can export and what customers are going to be suitable for Hazer based on their demand. And we touched on this before, and this slide gives us a little bit more detail. And this talks about their R&D process, in particular focusing on that graphite byproduct. So we can see the R&D activities focused on two pathways. So testing catalyst materials, which we talked about was iron ore earlier. And then the second key activity is that graphite characterization, application testing, and purification. So this is how they're going to use the graphite that they produce, and then trying to get it to a 99% purity, which they've mentioned essentially increases the value of the product, which will help with their margins, obviously. So a little bit more information on this slide about the graphite, talking about that potential value, 200 to 1,000 per ton, which is quite impressive. And then the applications being considered in this bubble here: energy storage, additives, water purification. So that's what they're sort of reviewing and trying to determine what will be the best use case for that graphite that they're producing. And here we get a brief financial overview. As we mentioned, a couple of quite significant government grants. So that ARENA one we talked about before, some debt that they have secured, and then an investment from an institution, $4 million, which is quite significant. And with all of this funding, they forecast they can deliver their development project of that processing plant and all their other planned activities throughout 2021 and 2022. So I think overall this is positive. It looks good, but we will need to see them start selling some product, and hopefully that is possible after the commissioning of their production facility in October. So this is a good sort of summary slide, which they talk about, their sort of key goals. They're talking about their first large scale deployment of the Hazer process, with that project to be delivered in October. Development of the commercial projects, a key focus in 2021, and collaboration with international partners. The R&D, processing their graphite. Strong balance sheet, investors and governments worldwide mobilizing resources to support low carbon transition. So that's the demand element. And then Alan Finkel, who we've mentioned on the channel before, the Australian chief scientist, he is saying about hydrogen, be ambitious and be patient. So everyone's sort of supporting it. We know the Australian government is funding these guys. The government's backing these projects. And I think projects that get government backing and also investor backing, we know investors are keen on clean, green energy with those strong tailwinds. I think this is a really positive sign for Hazer. And overall, I think their outlook is quite positive at this point in time. So jumping over to market index now to wrap this video up, we can see Hazer Group here trading currently at $1.43, 52-week range, sort of as low as 25 cents. So we can see that 1 year return is very impressive at 245%. That price chart movement there, we've had a little bit of a blow off top followed by a correction. So we'll see where that ends up going. I'm just watching and waiting at the moment to see that normalize a little bit. It's certainly a company that interests me quite a lot and is certainly on my list for investing. That's for sure. We can see a negative EPS because they're not quite profitable, although this may change going into 2022. Top 20 shareholders. So we can see Mineral Resources, which they used to have a partnership with, which has now been disbanded, has 8%. JP Morgan's in there, so a lot of institutions. Looks like a couple of families here, the Cornijo and the Drones family. I don't know what their relationship is with the company, but they are substantial shareholders. But there's no big controlling interest here. No one's got more than 10%. And I think that's a good thing for the company. It means the board can make the decisions that they want to without interference from institutions. Here on the price chart, we can see price movement and how far above that moving average we're currently sitting, going through a big period of overbought conditions on the MACD, and the stochastics are sort of just bubbling along as they would in the current overbought conditions. So a lot of hype around this at the moment off the back of not really many announcements. I'm looking to see this settle, but we could see another big jump, perhaps on an announcement that they're starting construction. But I think the big gains will be had when they do complete that project, hopefully in October as they forecast. If not, then yeah, we may see the share suffer. However, I think if they can complete that development successfully in October, yeah, we could be in for some big gains. Obviously, that's only my opinion. Please do your own research. And of course, this is not investment advice. It's just presenting the facts on Hazer. I hope you've enjoyed this overview of Hazer. It's certainly one that remains firmly on my watch list, and I'll be looking for an opportunity to jump into this company soon. I think their long-term prospects are good, and I think the government backing shows that it is the real deal and that we can expect a bright future for them, especially with that international interest in their product. And I like their competitive advantage of also having that graphite as a byproduct of their manufacturing of hydrogen. I think that's gives them a little edge on perhaps other hydrogen producers. So for me, I think they're certainly a very good pick at the moment in the hydrogen space on the ASX, which isn't really very developed. We haven't got many companies that are true hydrogen companies on the ASX except for Hazer Group. So Thanks so much for watching the video. I really appreciate you sticking around and watching it to the end. If you haven't done so already, make sure to like the video, leave a comment below if you've got any questions, and until next time, I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.